Good morning, I'm Steve Morgan. I'm a retired landscape architect, naturalist, and Chautauquan performer is Aldo Leopold. We're here to celebrate the centennial of the Gila Wilderness, which Aldo Leopold was very influential in making happen. The Gila Wilderness is our first national wilderness and actually first wilderness area in the world designated that way. This is part of a series called Starting Conversations that's sponsored by the New Mexico Humanities Council. So if we can begin, follow me inside. Good morning. My name's Aldo Leopold. Welcome to the Pitchfork Ranch.
I'm A.T. Cole, and my wife Lucinda and I are co-owners of the Pitchfork Ranch south of Silver City, New Mexico.
I'm Aldo Leopold, born in Burlington, Iowa, and spent many years in New Mexico and Arizona, and ended up moving back to Wisconsin, and now I'm back out west.
Let me begin by saying what a treat it is for me to speak with you. I suppose that Darwin and you and Wallace Stegner are the primary influences in my world. So it's quite a treat. I want to ask you a question about a line in this book, but I'll bet you haven't seen it.
This is the book that they were going to publish when I passed away?
Yeah, I know they've changed. What's the story on the name change?
I don't know. My name, the title that I had for it was Great Possessions, because that's what I felt with our land in the Sand Counties at the shack. I felt that was Great Possessions, so I'm not sure where this name came from.
I think it was one of your sons who actually had the name changed, but you'll be flattered to know that it's been published in 16 different languages. You know, the last chapter of this book, the ethics that you left us, which has been studied aggressively and comprehensively by a number of scholars.
That's encouraging to hear. The land ethic?
The land ethic. And I think there's some discussion about how effective it's been. My understanding is that you based your ethic on the notion of community and the importance of community and basically altruism. But I'm afraid that it hasn't had the traction that it needs to have because we've gotten worse. Maybe an ethic, if your ethic was based on survival of humankind and of life generally as opposed to community, it might be better. As wonderful as this ethic is, it hasn't had the traction that we needed to persevere.
The whole thing to me with the land ethic, though, is that it's not static. It's evolving. It needs to change as our society changes, as the population grows, as the number of vehicles and the number of roads and all those things are changing. We need to keep adapting and trying to stay ahead of it. And in my time, we were not. We were losing ground. In fact, that's one reason why we felt we needed to put aside our wild lands, because we knew with the changes that we were seeing that we would not be able to reproduce. We wouldn't be able to replicate wilderness. We needed to save it as it is. One of the things that saddens me with my own life was my thinking about predators. Because when you have a community, you need to respect all the members. It was only after years and years of experience of observing that I realized how much in error I was in that thinking about the predators. Because you need to keep every cog and wheel of this whole system. And when you start pulling things out like we did with the predators, all of a sudden that engine doesn't run right. And so it's understanding and seeing, observing, and actually understanding what all goes together in that community and respecting it. Even though we don't understand some of it, you still need to respect it. And that's the only way I feel that we can allow nature the space to reset and to regenerate some of these systems. If climate is changing, like you're saying, and temperatures are rising, then these existing ecosystems are going to be changing too, I'm guessing. Certain plants and animals need certain requirements, and if those requirements are changing, they're either going to move somewhere, something's going to change.
I would like to inject survival into that equation. It doesn't sound to me like you're troubled.
If we keep observing and we keep thinking about what we're doing and what we're seeing and why things are working in certain ways, we don't know everything. So there's always new things to be looked at, new ways of kind of a new angle to look at something. And every time you do that, something's going to be revealed to you that you didn't know before. So if we just have blinders on, and I don't accept this and I don't accept that, you're not going to learn. You're not going to evolve. You have to be open to new things, because nature is not static. Nature is in constant change. And we need to embrace that.
Let me ask you to tell me about this. Talking about habitat in New Mexico, the result today is the progressive and natural deterioration, not only of plants and soils, but of the animal community subsisting thereon. The early settlers did not appreciate this. On the cienagas of New Mexico, some even cut ditches to hasten the loss. So subtle has been the progress that few residents of the region are even aware of it. So, what are you talking about there?
One of the most interesting things that I really researched, and I think I first started noticing it back in the 20s, were different things that caused erosion. And so I was always looking at overgrazing and just the different lands and how they eroded. And that was one of the things that I saw later on was the cienega, because most people, and I didn't know hardly anything about cienagas and what they actually meant. They were a special feature that were here in the Southwest. And I'm sure you know much more about that than I do, but the thing that I did see was how lack of care the people had for the land, which was one of the things that I saw over and over again. The overgrazing and just not understanding how our actions impacted the land and not really paying attention to that. In those words, the main thing that I was looking at was the fact that people do a lot of manipulating of the land without really thinking about what their impacts are going to be down the road. And the cienagas were one of the things that I was a little bit aware of. I spent most of my time with the water harvesting and just the devastation from overgrazing, particularly on the Prescott Forest and on the Carson National Forest. And I was only down in this area a little bit, but this is where I learned about the cienagas and how important they actually were.
When Lucinda and I purchased the Pitchfork Ranch, I didn't even know what a cienega was. I mean, I'd heard the term, but it turns out that in 1986, a couple of fish guys wrote an article on cienagas, a paper, and they've become more known. But before European arrival, there were, depending on which academic you ask, there were many hundreds, if not thousands, of cienagas in the Southwest, and now there are barely 400, and up to 95% of cienega habitat is now lost. Cattle grazing gets most of the blame, but it's also the absence of the fire, the beaver, agricultural recontouring. There's a lot of causes. The Spanish brought sheep. I mean, there were 37 sheep to every cow in the mid 1800s in New Mexico. So we're working to bring that cienega back, and there's some other reasons also in view of the climate change. But let me ask you a question. This is something that you wrote. You talk about reconstruction, restocking, rebuilding, and doctoring sick land. I mean, it sounds pretty medical to me. What's going on there?
You're referring to the use of like medical terms, the sick land, the health of the land, and that type of thing?
Yeah, well, those are the terms that you were using.
In my observations, that's how it always struck me, was when I saw land that wasn't healthy. In other words, it wasn't thriving. It had been abused. When I really understood the differences of a healthy land and a sick land, in 1935, I made a trip with a group of foresters to Germany. And there we witnessed industrialized forestry. All the trees were in rows, there were no undergrowth. It was a very managed system. There was no diversity. The following year, 1936, was my first trip that I did to the Rio Gavilan, south. A friend of mine, Ray Rourke, we went to, it's in the Sierra Madre, just south of the border. And the contrast of what we saw there struck me very strongly, because there we actually saw what I considered land in its own aboriginal form. Granted, there had been indigenous peoples living there for a long time, but they were very easy on the land. And so there was no fire control, no predator control, no roads, no cows. It was land in its pristine state, as much as you could find it. And what I saw there were systems that were working with each other, the predators and the prey, the forest and the fire. It was a balance, and it worked well. And I realized that all I had seen up to that point was sick land. It was land that was not healthy because we had abused it. And most of that was due to erosion, overgrazing on the most part. I think that just seemed a natural term to me to consider it. Land being healthy has the ability to regenerate itself. And what I saw in the United States, in our western lands, was land that was not regenerating. it was getting worse and worse. And so, to me, that was unhealthy land.
Yeah, there's the term now, restoration ecology. I mean, there's all these new terms to suitable for new disciplines. There's discussion about natural climate solutions, and there's some recent science papers that identify 21 different natural climate solutions, habitat restoration of which is one. We're contending with something called the climate crisis now.
What year are we talking?
We're talking 2024. In any event, there's been an agreement in Paris that claims that natural climate solutions can achieve up to 37% of what's necessary to get the temperature of the atmosphere back to where we can live comfortably. There's another paper that says that wetlands like cienagas and marshes and bogs can capture 5 times more excess atmospheric carbon than forests and 500 times more than oceans. So this restoration that you were doing at the shack, it's now gone global, if you will, and it's not gone global to the extent it needs to. I don't know whether you were prescient or just accidental, but it's important.
The first restoration that we started was at the Arboretum at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And the whole idea there was the tall grass prairie was disappearing. And there's still a fair amount of short grass prairie, but we wanted to bring it back. We wanted to have an example of tall grass prairie for the university to study, for the students to study. And so we started the Arboretum and we rebuilt these different areas. And that was something that I had always wanted to do. And so in 1935, I bought a piece of land on the Wisconsin River, which is a long story, but we eventually ended up planting tens of thousands of trees. And again, finding all types of prairie that we could and trying to bring back what was there before.
There's the issue of restoring a place. If you haven't lived there before, then how is it that you know how to go about the process of restoration?
Well, that's the whole thing with observing that I've really stressed to my students. You need to know what you're looking at. If you walk through your landscape and you're not paying attention, how can you make good decisions if you don't understand what is happening around you? And so if you become more observant, if you stop and actually think about what you're seeing, you also need to know what was there before. And I spoke about that earlier, about seeing places that still had some of the remnants, the wild elements, still in place. Because if you don't see that, then you have no comparison. You don't know what it's supposed to look like if it's a healthy situation. But the one thing that we have seen that has always excited me is that we don't know what the sense of place is, of what it was like, but nature often does. And so if you start by healing the soils are the key part. Once the soil starts to become, more organics and more water retention to where it becomes healthier, then other plants start showing up that are native that will take over this whole cycle. And so then your community starts to build back to where it was before. Most likely not to where it actually was before, because there are going to be changes, things that just will not come back. Working with nature as a partner is critical because she knows a lot more than we do.
Central to Almanac is your understanding of community. And then there's the abuse of land. So how does the concept of commodity relate to your understanding of community, or is there a connection there?
I see our lands abused because we do think of the land as a commodity, something that belongs to us, something to use, without having the respect for it. It's only when we start thinking of the land, so the soils, the waters, the plants, the animals, as a community. They all work together, as we are just part of that. It's only in that instance that you can show respect and love for that community. Otherwise, it's individual things that are not connected. And in actuality, they are. And that's the observing that we need to make, is seeing how this all works and how every part of that is critical. I know I wrote once about every cog and wheel needs to be acknowledged. Whether we understand how something works or not is irrelevant. We need to keep each cog and wheel.
Do you think nature has a sense of self?
I think there's certainly a sense of awareness. All you have to do is step outside and listen to the stories, the songs.